Now, regarding this stuff about Biden being better than Trump, I call your bluff that Biden is better than Trump. I have yet to see a single example of how it could be said Biden is better than Trump beyond superficial bullshit that in no way actually matters in reality. But even if I grant you the fact that Biden is in actuality somehow better than Trump, for whom is he better? Is he better for the forces of communism or the forces of socialism and the progressive forces in the United States who are trying to effect real change in this country? No, he's clearly not better for those forces. In fact, he's much worse for a multitude of reasons. One of them is that he shifted the very basis of the Democratic Party's supporters away from the once working class masses and to the white suburbs, who were decisive for Biden's victory in the first place. Now, given the class elements who now define the base of the Democratic Party, it's quite clear that Biden is a disaster for the left. And the question of whether Trump is better for the left is an open question. I would argue that Trump was better for the left, and maybe you're going to see just how true this fact is in the years to come. The idea that Vosh and BreadTube are finally going to have their day now that Biden's elected is the biggest joke I've ever heard. You're going to witness the complete decimation of the American left in the years to come, and you can come back and hold me to that. I promise you that much.
First off, the idea that Trump is better for the American left than Biden is ludicrous for a number of reasons. For one, this is the most important thing to me. He's worse just on like a basic level. Trump winning means more people dying from COVID. It means less time is available to prevent the climate apocalypse. It means that more people are going to be thrown off of healthcare. We might see an entire Obamacare repeal. It means it's more likely that we're going to see a full-blown conflict with Iran. It means that more people are going to die in Yemen. It means more people are going to get deported and sent to concentration camps. There's going to be more family separations. Just on a number of things. But even if you were to take the hyper-accelerationist, like literally screw all minorities, all poor and working people, and the planet, and just take it down the road because hopefully Trump will make things bad enough that we're going to like then elect a socialist. For one, I don't even know if we're going to be able to have elections after a second Trump term. I really do think he is that dangerous and that anti-democratic. Generally speaking, it seems as if when someone like Trump falls, people really aren't willing to look for like radical solutions. They're looking for just someone who isn't Trump. Like Bernie Sanders, for example, was more successful in 2016 running against Hillary Clinton after 8 years of Obama than he was in 2020. Because I mean, in 2020 there was the electability argument, the fact that well, God, we just want Trump out. We're willing to nominate anyone just as long as we think they can beat Trump. And like Bernie, we think he's too radical. Now, obviously, there are going to be people who are going to say that regardless because they're establishment shills. But that argument is more the case when there's more stakes on to beat someone like Donald fucking Trump. Than it is when that choice is up in the air, as it was during the time of the Democratic Party. As far as like what are like fundamental ways that Biden is better than Trump, just in practice, not just in terms of what he says. Well, I can give you quite a few examples. Biden has said that he's going to cut Saudi funding in Yemen. Trump was a massive Saudi shill who was basically bribed off by them and giving them more weapons so they can continue committing a genocide. Biden is repealing the Keystone XL access pipeline. Trump would not have done that. Biden overturned the travel ban and the ban on transgender militaries and the ban on the transgender people serving in the military, as well as DACA. And God, what's some of the other stuff? He's started contracts to end private prisons. Again, wouldn't have happened under Trump. And he's pushing for what it seems like is a much more serious vaccine rollout. And admittedly, I do think that the aid package was a little bit less than what Trump would have promised. So I guess that's one way where he's worse. But still, that's I think 4 or 5 that's 5 major issues where he's significantly better than Trump on a number of things. And the Paris Climate Accords, can't forget about that. As well as probably a bunch of other stuff. And again, we haven't even seen the full extent of it. Now, I don't think that the next 4 years will be anything amazing. It won't be anything close to necessarily what I want, but it'll be much better than what Trump will provide. That I don't think that's just to me common sense. And I know there are probably a lot of people in your chat right now who saying that I'm a bootlicker and that I'm a simp for the Democratic establishment. Well, let me know that I am not. I'm simply a rational human being who does what all rational human beings do in this kind of situation, which is say that Biden is less bad than Trump. To me, this is basically inarguable.
The first thing you said is that it's ludicrous to think that Trump is better for the American left. I beg to disagree, even though there's no way we can necessarily prove it. From a logical perspective, you could easily argue that Trump is maybe better for the American left, if only for the reason that he was able to shock the Democratic Party so profoundly and change the political game so profoundly that the establishment is revealed as the emperor. What is it called? The emperor isn't wearing any clothes. The establishment was exposed. Its weakness and vulnerability was exposed. The fact that leftists failed to capitulate upon the lesson of Trump's victory is the result of their own incompetence and the result of the forces of opportunism and the class forces that preponderate the left, the professional managerials. A real left would have easily been able to see from the Trump momentum, see from this sea of chaos, the ability to actually build an alternative to this wretched American deep state and establishment which has been trudging along for almost the entirety of the past 3 or 4 decades as completely invincible and unchallengeable. Trump changed that, for better or for worse. Trump made it so that the mainstream media was no longer trusted in the same way as it was before. Trump made it so that the establishment was no longer seen as invincible as it was before. The time for political alternatives was opened up by Trump. And I would reckon the only reason we have such a plethora of so-called radical leftists, at least compared to before Trump was elected, was for no other reason than the fact that Trump was elected. Trump is the reason why BreadTube exists in the proportion or the level of popularity that it does. Now, you may contest that point, and I'll contest it right back. We won't agree. If you don't see it, you don't see it. But that's my fundamental view, and it's the view shared by many others. Now, you de-emphasize that point to go into this whole holistic view of society as to who is ultimately better, Trump or Biden. And I completely reject this framing of harm reduction for no other reason that you are neglecting the part about where you as a subject are actually decisive for the conditions and circumstances you are claiming are better in the first place. Okay? You can say, even if we were make the argument that less people are going to die under Biden, this doesn't excuse you using what little energy and ability you have to voting for Biden, because there's not a one-to-one direct relationship between what you think society should be and the people you go and vote for. Now, I know in American democracy that's an incredibly shocking thing to say, but there isn't a one-to-one relationship, because where does the threshold end and where does it begin? What do I mean by this? If you are going to take holistic responsibility for all of the deaths the lesser deaths that occur under Biden, you must also take responsibility for all the excess deaths that occur under Biden, as compared to, in the grand scheme of things, the ultimate grand scheme of things, as compared to you spending your time and energy devoted to creating a true political alternative to the Democrats. Now, you are just restricting the scale of time to 4 years. I find that completely arbitrary. What if the reason more people die than they otherwise would have from a scale of 50 years? Since you spent all your time and resources voting for Biden rather than building a political alternative, which in 50 years, in the grand scheme of things, would ultimately be able to overthrow the Democratic Party or do something interesting. Moreover, I completely reject the humanitarian view of harm reduction as the linchpin of politics at all. Politics is an ugly business. Politics is not charity. There is no direct relationship between individual morality and politics. Politics is a sphere of war. It's a sphere of struggle and has nothing to do with preventing more deaths than otherwise. Did more people die than they otherwise would have under communist states? Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But in the grand scheme of things, this is actually not what's decisive in defining the political class struggle. You mentioned accelerationism, which is a phrase that's extremely misunderstood. And you're saying you said if we're accelerationists, we're saying screw minorities and working people. Well, we're only screwing minorities and working people if our actions are decisive in the outcome faced by them. If our actions were decisive in the outcome faced by minorities and working people, we would not be faced with the paradox of having to vote for Biden or Trump in the first place. This is what my argument was before and what I was trying to get at. Our decisions are not actually what is decisive. If they are, we wouldn't need Biden as our only alternative. This is a paradox I've never seen anyone even remotely attempt to worm their way out of, because no one can worm their way out of this basic point. That's why the whole harm reduction argument is completely meaningless. You assume that you have power that you don't have. You don't have the power to make a difference, so you don't have the power to make excuses for not building the ability for you to stand on your own independent 2 feet as a political alternative by building a new People's Party or a new political alternative. Even if we accept the 4 years time scale, how can you be certain that Biden is ultimately going to lead to less deaths than under Trump? Well, Trump isn't president in these 4 years, so we have no way of actually knowing that. I completely disagree that the COVID deaths in America are the result of Trump being in power. America as a civilization is not equipped It's not capable of dealing with something like coronavirus for a complex multitude of reasons. We're a very individualistic society. It doesn't actually matter how many... It's a paradox. You have Democrats who want lockdowns, but unlike Asian societies, who are more collectivistic societies, when we institute lockdown in America, we don't help people. We throw them out on the street. We close people's small businesses, and we have people lose their jobs, and we don't support them. We leave them on their own. That's the issue in America. Whether you are against lockdown or pro-lockdown leads ultimately to the same outcome of suffering for the American people. It's a paradox that has nothing to do with Trump being in power or not being in power. There's no one more than Trump who wanted to get rid of this coronavirus problem, which was an impediment to his prized and prided stock market growth. Now, Biden may be less likely to engage in conflict with Iran, but he's much more likely to engage in conflict with Syria and Russia and other countries. Not sure what is so... And also the acceleration of America's imperial aggression against Iran and China. I don't even know if that's going to really be ultimately softened under Biden. Maybe the Democrats want to play a different approach rather than direct head first into conflict with Iran. But conflict to me of some kind seems inevitable. But even if we neglect this thing about Iran, Biden wants to engage more aggression against Russia and more aggression against countries like Syria. So we've swapped and Korea. So we've swapped out Iran for Korea, Syria, and Russia. I don't see what's such a accomplishment about this. The thing about Saudi Arabia and the arm shipments to Saudi Arabia, well, it seems like the damage has been done. All of this is not about harm reduction. It's about political chess games. Bin Salman is more allied with Russia now. And that's the reason why the Democrats are against the current establishment in Saudi Arabia. But if it wasn't Bin Salman who was in power in Saudi Arabia, but the old status quo, the Democrats would have no issue in supporting them. Regarding this stuff about concentration camps, what a completely baseless thing to say, given that there are still kids in cages even to this day, and that Biden has walked back his promises to end the rigorous deportation and anti-immigrant programs initiated under Trump. And there's direct evidence for that. You can look it up. There's no indication whatsoever Biden's walking those back. You mentioned DACA and other things, which is all well and good for the educated classes of the United States. Doesn't say anything about the immigrants who are coming here desperately and with nothing on their back, crossing the border, and this immigration crisis. So that's two completely different things. Regarding the whole business about climate change, I actually don't care whether Biden accepts the Paris Accord, and there is nothing these people can do about climate change. The more they can't, it's a point of no return. They can try to soften it as much as they want, but ultimately the people who are going to be decisive for climate change are the people. And Biden is not going to convince the overwhelming majority of the people who distrust the establishment and who distrust the Bill Gateses and the Davoses and the Great Reset type people. They are fundamentally conspiratorial minded, fundamentally distrust these people, and they're not going to get with the program. So there's going to be a lot of resistance to that, and that's the main issue actually. The main issue isn't who's willing to implement the best policies from above and abstractly. The main issue is the people who are the impediment to the changes that the climate scientists find necessary to stop the climate disaster. Although I myself am personally skeptical that there's anything they can even do to stop the changes that are inevitably going to come. I think the only thing that can be done is to adjust to them. And I think countries like China are the best equipped to adjust to them. Now, regarding this thing about the pragmatic approach that Trump should be gotten rid of so the Democrats can stop using him as an excuse for the fact of that we just need to get rid of Trump. Well, it goes back to this issue of it goes back to the same exact issue of why are you focused on what these establishment Democrats are thinking in the first place? It doesn't matter what they think because they don't represent the majority of the American people. Like I said, the goal isn't to convince them who's the most viable. Obviously, Bernie Sanders is never going to be viable toward those people. Bernie Sanders will only ever be viable to the same anti-establishment forces that Trump attempted to monopolize. Now, Trump failed on many of his promises to help working Americans and working families, and Bernie should have intervened there. But he did it. He shilled for the Democratic establishment. And I don't see this whole thing about, well, let's get rid of Trump so they can stop using him as an excuse. Well, just who is using Trump as an excuse? Is it the American people, or is it the establishment and the elites who are nowhere near decisive for the victory of progressive, socialistic, and communistic forces?